All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the TSMU Q&A series. I'm your host, Mark Hubbard, where by day I'm a product manager at Lenovo, TSM's PC and monitor sponsor. Today, I'm extremely excited to be joined by a very special guest, Lauren Chen. Lauren, how's it
Hello.
going?
Good. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. So before we jump into your introduction, because I'm sure we're going to have plenty to talk about tonight, I just want to give everyone a quick reminder that for this Q&A, we'll be pulling questions from the TSMU Discord. So if you have a question for Lauren, head on over to discord.gg/TSMU and ask your question in the Ask Stream Questions Here channel. Allie's done everything she could to make it as straightforward as possible. And if you're not a part of the Discord community already, you're missing out on a ton of awesome opportunities to engage with a really fantastic community and kind of kick off your network in esports. But once you've joined the community and you've asked your question, the Ask Stream Questions Here channel, you can be joined the waiting room voice channel and wait to be selected on the show to join us and spend some time talking with Lauren. Lauren, while everyone gets their questions in, go ahead and give yourself a little bit of an introduction.
Yeah, so thank you for explaining all that about TSMU. I'm Lauren, also known as Tamagu online. My main position right now is that I'm a social media or an esports social partnership intern at Logitech G. Previously, I was a social media intern for the past year, so I mostly worked on things like product launches and creating a lot of the content that you see online for our Logitech G global page as well as our Logitech G esports page. But besides what I do at Logitech, I'm also extremely involved in collegiate. It's actually my roots, and I'm still studying right now. I'm an incoming third year at UCLA. And within UCLA, I'm also involved in our casual gaming club, which is Brewing Gaming as the president, as well as UCLA Esports as their marketing director. And I've had a lot of really supportive networks during my time here, including working at Evil Geniuses in the past, as well as DreamHack Anaheim doing collegiate stuff in general, just marketing stuff. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Okay, so no short stops on the resume. That's for sure. Uh, Absolutely awesome. So I'm gonna kick it off really quick while everything's getting loaded on the back end. But that's a lot to balance. You've done so much, and what I'm assuming is a pretty short amount of time. How are you balancing all that? How have you kind of dabbled in all those areas?
I've met a lot of really good people. I think that's the best way to really think about my path so far. Because honestly, I've met a lot of people in the space recently, especially younger folks who have come into college knowing that they wanted to do esports and they're really passionate about what they do. And personally, for me, I was just someone who was mediocre at playing games. I mentioned it in chat earlier, but like I enjoy playing games, but I'm not necessarily good at them. That's why my Valorant rank is super pretty. But I was really lucky to meet a lot of good people when I first started at UCLA who have basically just led and paved the path for me to where I am today. And ultimately, it's a lot of learning how to balance my time and trial and error that has led to where I am now.
That's awesome. So, a quick plug for everyone as well. Um, uh, you talked a little bit how you just made it a point where you got to meet people, and I want to kind of highlight one more time because I don't think I called it out well enough in the introduction, but how valuable this resource is that TSM is putting out. Uh, Lauren talked about, I want to ask you a little bit more about it too, because you talked a lot about your fascination, not just from you like to play video games, right? But more from like a back end and execution and infrastructure standpoint of gaming and esports as a whole. But the first part for anyone looking to grow their career absolutely anywhere is you've got to establish a network. And TSMU has made it a point where you can be involved in this community and get to know people like Lauren and get a really great chance to ask her questions about starting her career, right? And you're still very early on in your career. So plenty of fantastic steps right ahead of you. So I think first off, I kind of want to ask you a little bit more about like what fascinates you about this kind of infrastructure, right? So like you said, hey, right, Valorant rank's not the thing you want to boast and show off. So what got you so fascinated and interest? What sparked that passion for you here in gaming and esports?
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely one of those kids who have been like playing games since I was super young. For me, my most notable memory is I started playing Mortal Kombat with my dad when I was 8. Probably not the most child-friendly game, but enjoyed it a lot. It was really the way that I bonded with my dad, the way that I bonded with my younger brother. And as I got older, it was really the main thing that uh, kept me close with my friends throughout elementary school and even high school. So when I got into college, because I'm actually an out of state student, I'm not originally from California. I was really nervous, but I knew that I would always have a home in gaming. And for me, being able to meet these people and kind of enjoy that community experience that you really get with gaming is the biggest draw for me.
Awesome, awesome. So with that, I think you got a really good like kind of how things have been laid and what tee things off for you. By the way, great choice in Mortal Kombat, by the way. But we have plenty of questions kind of pouring in now from the community. So I'll share that little bit of microphone and hand it on over. But the first one we've got teed up. Why did you choose to study communication? Did you always know that that was going to be your major? You're going to go in the direction of comms, or did it take a while for you to land on, hey, this is where I want to be. This is where I want to kind of start my craft.
Yeah, so originally, especially during high school, I had a lot of like considerations in terms of what I wanted to do with my major. I think I jumped around a lot. For me, I had like, or I thought about doing biomedical engineering because I was really interested in prosthetics and I wanted to create prosthetics that would help more people. But realistically, I understand my limits as a person, and I knew that for me, STEM was definitely not the thing that I was good at. I also did a lot of speech and debate when I was in high school. I competed nationally. It was really big for me. And going through that experience, especially with speech and debate, helped me decide that communications was like a really good major for me because I know that my skills are closer aligned to humanities. And also, the flexibility of the major overall was just a really big appeal for me because I wanted to try and get something that would allow me to pursue anything that I wanted, and especially going into college, I was really adamant about going into law because I hadn't found out about esports yet. And for me, communications was really the stepping stone that would get me there at some point.
Gotcha. So when you looked at that, I think that's a really awesome piece of advice. Because I think it's a really tough question to look at an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old and say, hey, decide what you want to do with your life, right? And that's a big thing to hand out. But I know one thing that a lot of young people get challenged on when they're going through and selecting like majors, right? Is hey, what are you going to do? How are you going to make yourself marketable with that? So when you went with communications, right? Like generally, a lot of people will give advice that you should go to something very precise. You actually went the opposite route. You chose communications for how broad it was. Uh, Whenever it came time for you to start that job hunt and find your opportunities and kind of break in, uh, what did you do to kind of make your communications major feel really valuable and add those as skills for making yourself valuable on the market?
Yeah, I think for sure the best thing that I did wasn't even like part of my major actually. I think that for me, my major is definitely something that I thought about a lot because I had to consider what skills I wanted to hone in on and what skills I wanted to highlight, especially when I was applying to jobs. But for me, the most important thing was always finding experience or opportunities to experience things I was interested in. So, for example, I came to campus thinking that I was extremely passionate about things like journalism, but it turns out that after doing things like interning at the Daily Bruin, which is UCLA student newspaper, that wasn't necessarily. I think there are just some things that you can't figure out by academic major alone. And instead, the best thing that you can do is put yourself out there and try to experience it. And worst case, right, you don't like it. So I found out that I really didn't have like the fit for journalism, even though one of the most popular places for communication majors to go is actually journalism. And for me, I wouldn't have experienced that if I didn't try it out in the first place. So I think academic major is important. It's definitely something that people should think about. But I think to me, experience triumphs everything that you can get through that major alone.
It sounds like you did a lot to kind of pursue opportunities that were put in front of you as well, right? Like you made it a point to kind of jump and attack anything that kind of came in front of you.
Yeah, I definitely tried really hard going into college.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, we'll go on over, Lauren, to the next question. This one's going to go a little bit more into like your start in gaming and esports, and we lightly touched on that. But Dana from the community asks, how did you begin in esports? And then did you always want to get there from the start, or is it something you kind of discovered through college? I think you hinted at that a little bit, but make it a point to kind of dive a little deeper on it.
Yeah, definitely. I can actually tell you my little story about esports. So for me, my esports career is a lot of luck, in my opinion. Luck and good people, which I mentioned earlier. I didn't come into college thinking I would do esports. Actually, I knew what esports was. I was a passionate fan of esports as like a viewer only, but I never thought that I'd be working in it because for me, when I saw esports, the first thing I assumed was that I had to be a player. I had to be good at the game in the first place, and the best I could ever get was like gold one in League of Legends, right? So that's not going to work out for me.
Nothing wrong with that.
But
Nothing wrong with that.
but my first year on campus, I met in a really amazing roommate. Her name is Olivia. She had worked for NYXL in high school and was actually working for UCLA Esports already before we even started in the first place. And she was just so full of talent. and encouraged me to join Bruin Gaming because she said that if I was interested, then I should really try, or at least I should try and find an opportunity. And I remember going to the first general meeting. I sat through it. It was really exciting and cute, and everyone was so like into gaming, and it was great to find that community again. But the president at the time, Sunny or Counterpoint, who I see in the chat, I was so scared of talking to him. I couldn't do it. She physically picked me up, dragged me over, and just said that like I wanted to talk to him, and that was like really the start of my esports adventure. Is just her doing that in the first place because Sunny was the one that uh, told me that I could volunteer, even though I didn't really have any experience in esports in the first place, and also told me that like social media was just a role that he thought would fit me really well, and it ended up working out for me. So that's really my start, and since then, my first year of college, like I've just constantly been involved in esports, and I've been lucky enough to meet people and have these amazing opportunities, such as working with a lot of collegiate leaders on big events, and also opportunities like Logitech to continue growing my skills in this. So thank you, Sunny. I know you're in the chat.
A big shout out to Suddy in the chat. So, touch on that story a little bit more. So, do you still find it, right? It sounds like when it was time for you to take that first jump, nerves really got you, right? Like nerves really. Do you
Oh
still find
yeah.
it? Is it still nerve wracking, right, when it comes to starting these new conversations? Because, right, with your job now, I'm only assuming you're engaging with countless people all the time. Do you still find it nervous to strike up that initial conversation, or has like the repetitions really made it to where you're overcoming that?
I think instead of feeling nervous, I've begun to feel more excited because for me, like gaming is always about connection, right? And so being able to now find a space where I am comfortable in gaming or at least like comfortable with what I'm doing right now, it makes me more excited to meet people and try and understand their stories or even why they're into esports in the first. So little less of the nerves, a lot more of the excitement.
So, do you have one piece of advice you give someone who might find themselves in that position, but maybe they don't have Sunny there to physically take them to where they need to go? Do you have a piece of advice for that person who might just be waiting for that one good tip to jump over and shoot their shot?
I mean, that's all I would say, right? Like the worst that someone can tell you is no. That's the mentality that I've honestly picked up over my time in esports. I say my time in esports, it has been like barely a year now, or barely over a year. But realistically, the worst thing that anyone can tell you is no. The only person that's stopping you from trying to understand or like reach out for an opportunity would be yourself. And I remember, like, even when I was applying to Logitech, I told myself that I wasn't fit for the job. I wasn't even someone who was in the space for a long time. By the time I had already applied, I had only been working in esports for less than 4 months. But I really wanted the position. I really wanted to try, and it worked out for me. So I think for whoever is out there who is thinking about doing esports but is hesitant because they don't have an awesome roommate like Olivia who will pick you up and drag you over to Sunny, um, just try it. You never know what can happen. The worst thing that they can say is no, and the best thing that you can do is take it as a learning experience and move on and see what you can do better in order to get that opportunity next time.
So, and is that is going to lead really nicely into my next question is, I'm assuming now at some point in your career you've at least faced at least one no, right? What's your
Yeah.
advice? What's your advice to someone to bounce back from that no?
I think for me, the biggest thing is always asking for feedback and also a lot of self reflection. So I can honestly say this, but um, actually, I only got my Evil Geniuses position the second round. I got denied the first time. And for me, it was really hard to accept because in my head, it was like, why did I get rejected? Like, I shouldn't have been rejected, or even like, I'm not enough. And it was a lot of imposter syndrome because for me, I was young in the space and I was extremely nervous. But I think for me, it's like a personal growth thing where I had to think about like what it is that I was lacking, right? At the end of the day, the like laying down and just saying that I didn't get it because like EG was wrong is not the way that you can grow or continue to improve yourself so that you come back stronger for the next application goal. And so it was a lot of reaching out to my previous interviewers. So Greg Kim in particular was extremely helpful in terms of giving feedback about what I had told him or why it is that I didn't necessarily get the position the first time. And after that, I took a lot of effort into making sure that I was filling those gaps or trying out new things to increase the number of skills that I had or try to continue building on the current skills I have as well. And eventually it worked out. So hang in there, don't give up. Just keep trying, ask for feedback, and also ask yourself sometimes like what it is that you want or what it is that you can keep doing on your own time that'll improve the skills that you have now.
Awesome. Dana, I hope we covered out on everything with that one. Really appreciate you asking the question. Lauren, we're going to jump back a little bit. So we just touched a lot on esports and kind of your jump into that. This one's going to go a little bit back into your college career.
Mhm.
And this question specifically, like, did you always find yourself getting involved in a lot of extracurriculars in college? Or is that something you kind of gradually dabbled into? How did you kind of grow your college life and take on a lot of responsibilities?
It's an interesting question. So,
Mhm.
I want to preface this with, I think my college life has been interesting because I spent 2 quarters in person and everything else has been online. So, I just finished my second year of college, so it's not like I have a ton of experience. But my first year, I was extremely passionate about making sure that I was involved in something or I was experiencing as much as possible because to me, the goal of college is to figure out what I want to do in life and what I want to pursue as a passion. And so when I first got on campus, I interviewed for I think like 3 or 4 different clubs because I was just so interested in figuring out what it was that I wanted or didn't want. And by the end of my first quarter, I only kept 2 of them, which was UCLA Esports and Brewing Gaming, because for me, it's just a question of like testing the waters. And then if I don't like it or if I don't think it like strikes my passion, then I'm not going to like invest my time into it. But for me, esports was just something that was worth investing in. And that ended up being like the main thing that I kept for the rest of my college career. I say that as if it's ended, but I'm still in college.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Wow. You have taken on a lot in your short tenure. Good for you and congratulations. And next, we've got another one rolling right up from Carlos. And Carlos wants to know what you. Oh, this is so perfect. So Carlos wants to know what has been one of your biggest struggles as a student leader, and what have you do to overcome it? And yeah, what do you do to overcome it, or is it something you're still working on?
Yeah, I am still working on it. I think the biggest thing that I faced, especially at first, transparently, was like imposter syndrome. I had a really hard time with it initially when I took the position because I wasn't always the president for Brewing Gaming. I actually started this role in during COVID. It was during I think March or May of last year. So exactly when COVID started, I took on the position for president as Brewing Gaming, and it was actually extremely difficult for me to accept because for me, I felt like I was just this new kid who coincidentally got a position. And I felt like I couldn't really say anything or do anything because I didn't know any better. It took a lot of time. I'm still working on it right now, but having a really good support system and staying in contact with the people who have previously held the position or just people that you generally work with, I think is the best way to try and combat this issue. So for me, Sunny, who is the one that gave me a position in the first place, like he was always there for me. Like even nowadays, I know that he's always a DM away if I really have any questions. And for the rest of my board members, like they're all extremely transparent. If I have any problems, I tell them immediately, or I try and talk it out with them and see what they think as well. So that helped a lot with in terms of the imposter syndrome. I think another thing that I discovered was extremely difficult was actually delegating work. So I helped with coordinating a lot of the large events that happen. So they're all branded SoCal something. So the most or the largest one that we had was like the SoCal Fall Festival, and like the most recent one is the SoCal Flower Fest and the upcoming Summer Splash. But for me, those events were a lot of fun. I learned a lot about like event planning as a result of it. But what I didn't realize that I would learn along the way is how to delegate work in the first place. And it ended up putting a lot of stressors on me because essentially I was trying to do a lot of things that would usually be split among a lot of team members on my own. And it wasn't a rational thing to do. So over time, definitely learned to do that. But it's a lot of trial and error and testing your limits as a person and seeing what it is that you can do to try and figure out like what you want in the space and also what you can handle.
Sure. And this actually rolls. I'm so glad you brought up the SoCal events that you help put on. We will definitely want to dive into those in a second. But we actually have a question from the community from Revamp who wants to know, uh, is there a certain criteria that allows schools to be invited to take part in those events?
There
How
isn't
can
a
schools get invited? Yeah.
Yeah, there isn't a certain criteria. It's mostly based on like need and also like what staff members that school has. I think is mostly the way that like I would put it.
Okay. And with those events, right? Like, so with like the SoCal Fall Fest, multiple schools are collaborating, right, to put on this massive event.
Yeah.
Did you guys struggle at all with getting all of these teams to work together? And if so, how did you kind of bring everyone together and get that collaboration in a good spot?
Oh yeah, it was definitely hard. So the first time we ever coordinated with the club was last summer. It was called the UCSB x UCLA Summer Splash. So we brought the name back. But it was really hard the first time I did it because for me, I'm always used to my workflow, and as like the president, I always push my workflow in the way that I work onto other people. And I love being organized. I love having meetings because for me, it's a way to like realistically sync with the people who I'm working with. But for the other schools, that wasn't necessarily how people work. And so it was a lot of like trying to figure out what their balance was and trying to figure out like how is it that I can stay happy or feel like I'm still updated with what UCSB is doing, uh, while not like piling a ton of meetings on them. I think another really big part of it is honestly trust. So I was really lucky to meet someone from UC Santa Barbara even before we started this event. His name's Oscar, and we met at DreamHack Anaheim. But for me, having someone like that on that team was really important because I had already trusted him. I knew that he could do amazing work, and he does. And for me, it just inspired a lot of confidence in terms of like what I could expect from that workflow. And moving into the future events, it's a lot of learning more about your staff members, making sure that you understand them and being open with them. That really helped in terms of understanding what their workflow is and also how they approach things like what they're doing in the event and also like the general things that they do within their club.
So, and in one of our previous questions, you had talked about how learning how to delegate tasks in work has been one of the more important skills you've picked up along the way.
Mhm.
When it comes to putting on these events, right? How do you find yourself willing to let go of that control, right? I think that's one of the hardest things people overcome when they're learning how to delegate is they know what their skill level is and they have a very hard time like inherently having that trust of letting go of that task. So what have you done to kind of improve your delegation skills and how valuable has it been in things like this event?
Extremely valuable. I can tell you off the bat. um, it was really hard. What you said is 100% correct. For me, I was really hesitant about kind of letting go of those reins because for me, like I had been doing it for so long, right? And so it's like, oh, you can rely on yourself and you know that you can do it already. So why would I let someone else do it? Was like the mentality I originally approached. It. And it's really bad for you because you're essentially just overworking yourself until someone else steps in or you kind of have to ask for help openly. And those staff members are there for you. They don't exist just to sit around. And for me, like I wasn't giving them a fair shot of experiencing what it was like to be in the event. And so I also see him in the chat, but Revamp, one of the TSM like social media interns actually, is our marketing lead. And for me, like Revamp or Courtney is a really good example of what happens when you delegate work properly. Originally, I used to do all of the marketing work on my own, or I would try and lead everything on my own, including the different groups. But having people like Courtney who are not only extremely talented, but also extremely passionate, who know what they're doing, and having them step up and take that lead position for us has been an extreme help because for me, it's good to have a second pair of eyes on it. And also, I learned to really, really trust him with what he was doing. And also, it lets him prove himself in a sense because it gives him the opportunity to show off how talented he is and how good he is at what he does. And obviously, the fact that like he's working at TSM is a testament to his skill that I wouldn't have known if I didn't let go of those reins and just let him lead. So it's definitely partially giving opportunities to others and knowing that you can't do everything on your own. And there's nothing wrong with splitting that work to other people. And you're not weaker for doing it. And instead, it's definitely a talent that you will cultivate over the period of the event. And you will be better for it, and the event will be as well.
So how important is it then? How important do you find it then to surround yourself with the right people and make sure you've built up the correct support system or just like the correct collaborators or teammates? Is that something that's been a learning point for you as well, or is it something you've always been pretty good at?
It's definitely learning. I think a lot of esports is always learning. The first few events that I did, I really didn't put in the effort to get to know these people as people. And instead, I just sort of thought, oh, they're staff members, they're here for the event, and then I'll never talk to them again. Bad mentality. For me, especially with like the newer events and the larger events that we've expanded to, getting to know people has been extremely important for me. and also finding that good support system has been one of the best parts of the events that I would have missed out on if I really kept thinking that way, because I would have missed out on the opportunity to make friends, like all of the amazing people in chat right now, or a big chunk of the ones that are talking. So I think it's definitely important. Invest in your staff members, not only as people who are working on the event, but also as friends and people that you can care for and support as well.
Sure. Well, let's go ahead, Lauren. Then let's shift gears a little bit away from a lot of the events that, which, by the way, absolutely incredible. You're able to manage so much. But let's shift a little bit more into like what is becoming like your professional life. So, how did you find your Logitech internship, and what do you think made you stick out from the rest of the people that made you the one that got hired?
Oh, that's a hard question. I would want to hear that from my managers, actually. I actually found it on LinkedIn. I was just searching for jobs in esports one during winter quarter because I didn't even know I wanted to do esports. I was actually just applying to random places. My mentality was, I'll just apply to places. If I get rejected, I'll just do summer school and it's going to be okay because nobody gets internships. And I was really lucky. I think part of the reason why I was potentially chosen was the fact that I think I was very vocal about ideas that I had going into the interviews and whatnot. I was already looking into like Logitech G's social pages and also trying to understand a little bit about their voice and what they do, and trying to think of ways that I could apply my own creativity or what I wanted to do into like these is. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that's helped me, especially as I've moved through different interview cycles and internships. That I think helps me stand out is that I put the thought in beforehand and I already am thinking about what I would do in that position even before I have it in the.
So I actually want to. So you keep mentioning like one theme, and I think it's really awesome. And I Dunk, whenever I had the chance to talk with him, kind of mentioned this as well. You whenever it came to making yourself known for this job, right? It sounded like you had a very clear understanding of the value you were prepared to bring Logitech. And I think that's something that a lot of young people miss as they're going in, right? It's more than an app, right? Ultimately, a company is really trying to throw resources at you for you to solve problems they've got. And ideally, you're
Right.
bringing some kind of value on, right? Ideally, you're bringing something that someone else didn't. So it sounds like one thing that really helped you stand out from everyone else is that you understood you were going to bring a very clear value proposition to Logitech in hiring you. It sounds like your managers might say the same. You think they would give the same vote of confidence?
No idea.
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, let's keep going. So to keep asking a little bit. So tell us a little bit more about what you do as a Logitech intern, right? Go ahead, a little bit more of what either what the large picture is for your internship, and then a little bit of what like your day to day looks like.
Yeah, definitely. I can actually split this into two halves. So for the past year, I've just been the social media intern. So essentially, what I did was I thought of a lot of concepts for the posts that we wanted to make on social channels. So that includes Logitech G, which is the global channel. So that includes things like posting user-generated content or things like fan photos and adding like copy to those in the first place. Pulling clips from a lot of our amazing influencers as well as syncing with them, which was really cool, and also helping out with product launches, which is one of my favorite parts of the job. So, creating a lot of the copy for the first 2 weeks of the launch of a new product, or trying to find like opportunities to respond to people as well. So, a lot of community engagement on that end. Besides that, it was a lot of like or on the partnership end, which is what I'm working now, a big part of my job is actually focused on like trying to see how we can benefit our partners. So teams like TSM is a really good example, and also trying to find unique ways to highlight our relationship with amazing teams like TSM. And a lot of that also includes like product syncs or even just talking about like ideas for content is the best way I would summarize it.
Sure, yeah. So I know right from the esports team perspective, right? I think it's a pretty easy understanding of why a team wants to partner with a brand, right? I don't think it's necessarily
Mhm.
quite as obvious from the other end, right? Like how are brands going about and like seeking it? So when you're kind of looking at a lot of these partnerships, are there certain things you're looking at as, hey, this is the value we bring the partner and this is the value the partner brings us? And what are some of those things that you can delve into? I know some you can't, but some that you can delve into.
Yeah, definitely. I think a really big thing that, or I think it's a combination of things that I would usually think about in terms of whether or not a team is a good fit. So, I think working on the social media end helped me a lot in terms of understanding the voice and the passion behind Logitech G, or at least like the focus that it has, because you're basically talking as the voice of like the company on these social platforms. So that was definitely
Mhm.
really helpful in terms of streamlining that for me. I know that like for Logitech in particular, we're not only passionate about supporting professional players and making sure that they have the equipment to perform at their best. We're also passionate about like things like social issues and making sure that everyone is included and everyone is able to play regardless of their background. And for me, those two things stick out the most. So not only do we want teams that are obviously extremely successful like TSM, we also want teams that really care for the communities that are involved. So a really big thing about TSM for me that stands out, for example, was the fact that TSM took the time to tune into our Pride streams and also donate to them and towards our cause, because we were donating or we were getting fundraising money for like the Trevor Project, I think off the top of my head. And for me, seeing a team do something like that or actively try and support these communities is really big in terms of the social end, but also like that the whole part of TSM being a really successful team helps as well.
So, and as a way for you to give a piece of advice, right? And when I ask this, please, I'm not trying to blow up your inbox. But for anyone who might find themselves in a position, right, where they're going to be working on the partnership side for a team, are there any tips, like if you're the person that they're first talking to, right? If you're gate number one, what are the pieces of advice you would give them to understand what they probably need to have ready to talk with any kind of brand, right? If you were to give any kind of advice, they wanted to talk to Logitech, they want to talk to Lenovo, whoever it is, what are the things you think they need to be ready to bring forward as a team representative?
I think that's a really hard question, actually. For me, it definitely depends on the team, weirdly enough, because I think my role is a little bit more back end, or it's not as like forward facing as people would expect. Because a lot of the times, I'm not the one who calls the shot because I'm an intern.
Or
But what I do is the back work, like the end, like back end work in terms of researching the different teams and seeing what they do or what they might. So I think for me, like having easily accessible information in terms of like what your team is passionate about or what they do is really helpful. But besides that, like a lot of it is just on like my personal research into the teams, how I feel about them in general.
gotcha. So if a team's like if they're walking in, right, and I'm assuming you get to sit on a handful of these calls if you have, um, um, without saying too much, right? So if you're on there, is there anything that someone can do that would really impress you to where if you were talking with a manager or whatever, you'd be like, hey, this really stuck out to me. I think for this audience, this is really important. Is it right? Is it the value in the community? Is it a strong understanding of their strategy as a brand? Is there any one thing you think that is like a kind of a good thing to understand as a team when talking to brands?
I think like the core things that I would think about is like you should definitely know like your or it's like a bad triangle, right? So like it's like your
Hmm.
value as a team in terms of like how successful that team is, your value in terms of like your social work, or if you care about those social aspects, like strategically, what is it that your team cares about, or like what is it that your team is passionate about? And then the last triangle is also valuation. So like what is the value of things like your social media? Like what is it that you can provide to that brand in return for like their support? I think is the main three things that I usually think about when I'm going through that research cycle.
Okay. And let's pivot right off of that and go straight into it. And maybe you can say this. If not, we'll just go straight on to the next question. But are you able to give any examples of projects you've been able to work on during your time at Logitech?
Yeah, I think projects is an interesting way to put it. I can do products if that works.
Sure. Absolutely.
um, or go for it.
Continue. It'll come right into that since you mentioned products. Yeah.
Oh, okay. um, I think for me, the biggest products that I can definitely talk about now that they've been released, I think the biggest ones that I've been able to work on are like the headset that I'm wearing now, which is the Pro X wireless headset, as well as the Logitech G XKDA collection. Those were definitely the biggest impacts or products that I've been able to work on that have had the biggest impacts on like my career so far. For me, the Pro X wireless headset was actually the first product I ever worked on. And as someone who was a fan of Logitech G prior to working there, it was something that I was personally passionate about that really made me think about things like why is it that I care about this product so much? What is it that I would want to hear if I were on the receiving end instead of the end that already knew the product was coming out? And it forced me to think. That's why I really liked this product. And it was also my first thought of like, hey, how do I match my voice to Logitech G? Like the way that I talk and the way that the Logitech G channel talks is obviously different. Another really big thing was like the KDA project because it was my first collaborative piece. So Logitech G collaborates with like a couple of companies in terms of creating gear, right? And so first of all, working with Riot Games was really cool. It was like a childhood dream come true type thing where I get to mash this passion of mine for technology with like a game that I've been playing since like season 2 of its release. Crazy. But working with that partnership was really big for me because I had to think about someone else for once. When I usually launch products, what I'm thinking about is like, what do people who love Logitech G or might love Logitech G want to hear from me as I'm talking about these products? But instead of looking at it from that angle, I had to not only think of that, but also think of what would people who really love Riot Games want to hear about this product? What is something that, as a KDA fan, like what would I want to hear? I think having these opportunities to work on these really big projects are definitely interesting. And beyond that, being able to work with like some of the folks on the Riot Games team to make sure that the copy that I was doing was good was definitely an interesting experience as well.
How cool is it now? I just have to ask, how cool is it now seeing like the fruits of your labor appear in all the places they are? Is it like one of the best feelings?
It's definitely an interesting feeling. I think the funny thing about social media is that there's nothing concrete about what you do, right? Like I
Sure.
can't say that I made like a mouse or I can't say I made this headset. But what I can see is the fact that like my social media posts will pop up on my own feed or as an advertisement once in a while. And I just think it's like super funny, but it's definitely interesting. I think it's exciting, but I think for me, like the process is definitely the best part for me.
Gotcha. And Revamp is back and is asking of the Logitech product launches, which one has been your favorite to work on so far?
That's a hard question. I think KDA for sure, just because of like the significance to me in my heart as someone who's like played League of Legends for such a long
Sure.
time.
And maybe one of the most iconic like collaborations and or iconic launches in League of Legends so far. It's absolutely awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. So we'll pivot that right in now a little bit away from like a high level, and now Chung is asking, what do you think is the most challenging part of your role at Logitech, and how has it helped you become who you are today?
I think in terms of the most challenging part of it would be like creativity blocks is like the biggest thing that I would think of. Cause for me, like I want to create things that are really interesting, right? So in terms of like social media, what that would be is like picking the right shots or writing the copy that I think would reach out to the audience the most. And I think like a personal struggle alongside that would just be like being okay with not being 100% correct with like what you are doing. So I remember the first time I got like a piece of copy rejected. I was so upset. I was like, man, I suck at my job. But realistically, that's not true, right? It's just that sometimes you're not the one with the best idea, and that's okay. And it doesn't diminish your worth as a person if someone else has a better idea, right? It just encourages me to try and think of more creative ideas or try and do things that would be different, or it pushes me to like look for more sources that I think our audience would be interested in and to investigate those more. So for me, I think those are definitely the biggest things.
So, and now to ask a little bit more about like kind of how your internship has been, like just to keep going on that because your internship sounds awesome. By the way, it sounds so awesome. How right, that's an entry level position, right? Like it really gives you like a very big taste of kind of what goes on. Do you feel right now that even as an intern, that if you bring up your own ideas, like they're heard? Are you able to do that? Is it something that's pretty welcomed?
Yeah, absolutely. I was surprised actually. So I didn't actually expect that I would be able to get anything on like the pages, but I've had like a couple of my own ideas show up on the pages. So most recently or notably was I had the idea to draw G2's new like logo or mascot, Sammy, with another intern of mine called, or her name's Olive. Super talented, by the way. Um, But I had that idea and I was like, we should just post it on the Logitech G esports page because it would be a good way to incorporate like our talent together as like people who really love drawing, but also a good way to like shout out and like dedicate something to our partners. And that tweet ended up doing extremely well. I'm not sure if I can say like how well, I guess, but it was something that I was really proud of. And for me, my manager has always been there for me. All of them have been. And I've never had a moment where I felt like I was discouraged from saying something or discouraged from sharing my ideas once because they've always just been people who cared about what I wanted to say and also value the fact that I think creatively or try and come up with new ideas.
Which, oh, by the way, huge compliment to Logitech there. Logitech, you're clearly putting on an awesome program. And Lauren, I'm sure they appreciate how good of a light you just painted them in. That's absolutely awesome. Um, for the next one, a little bit more of a kind of like the structure of internship, right? There's no
Yeah.
doubt working in 2020 and 2021 has been flipped on its head, right?
Oh yeah.
I'm assuming working entirely remote, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So that is wow, that has been an undertaking for sure. And one of the biggest challenges that tends to come with working in a remote setting, especially as you're starting a new job, right? It's difficult to make really meaningful connections, right? It can be a challenge. How have you dealt with this in your position at Logitech? And is there any kind of tips you have for maybe how you've overcome it and still been able to develop those meaningful relationships with your colleagues?
Yeah, it's definitely been hard because I've been working at Logitech for over a year now, which is crazy to say out loud. But I've never met a single one of my coworkers in person, which is really, really crazy. Because previous to this, all of my jobs have been in person. I've known my managers, I know my coworkers, but this time it's weird. I think the biggest thing is to like reach out personally. So for me, like my co-intern or previous co-intern Gray and I were really close. The two of us would talk about anything, regardless of whether or not it had to do with work or not. It was just a way for us to connect outside of work. And even with the current co-intern Olive or Faux Show Bread, I see her in the chat. The two of us talk a lot, even if it isn't necessarily about work. And it's a really good way for me to just connect with her and get to know her better. And also, she's just an amazing person that I knew prior to her position at Logitech because she worked on the collegiate events with. So that was really lucky. I think otherwise for the other team members I work with that aren't necessarily interns, a really big part is like trying to connect during things like the one-on-ones that we have like every single week. And besides that, like Logitech is a really caring community in particular. My managers and also like the people that I work with have always actively tried to like connect me within their community as well. And we do things like playing games together. We'll have like a game night every Friday to try and like connect with each other. So there's like an active effort from all parties within our team to try and get to know each other better that's really helped with connecting with them even though we're physically far away from each other.
That value cannot be understated. It's so fantastic to hear that you've got that surrounding you because it has been a true challenge throughout all of this to kind of maintain that connection. So happy for you that it's worked out in such an awesome way and continues to do so. Uh, Real quick, we've got plenty more questions to ask you about your internship and your career path in front of you. But I just want to give everyone a quick reminder that if they're not already, be sure you're a part of the TSMU Discord. So for any podcast listeners or anyone else checking out the VOD, make sure you're a member of the community. TSMU has done a fantastic job making sure that there's plenty of resources open to you. Things like game nights and tournaments are all open and access to a fantastic communities right there. And if you ever want to have the opportunity to chat and talk with people who are already involved in the industry, even people at a very young age like Lauren, who are very far into this industry, do make sure you've checked out discord.gg/TSMU and you've jumped in and gotten involved with the community. With that reminder, Lauren, I want to jump right back into it because there's tons of great questions. Your internship sounds super awesome, but tax evasion from the community wants to know how your strategies change when you promote a flagship product like the Pro X Wireless versus something like a niche product like a simulator wheels and yokes that Logitech does a lot of product development in.
Yeah, really, really good question. Also, good username.
Yeah.
It's definitely different. I think I had to do a lot of research in terms of understanding like what our communities were like. So I wasn't the one that worked on the G923, which is the racing wheel that we released last year. But my co-intern was. But besides that, I worked on something called the G Challenge, which is actually happening right now as well. But it's a sim racing competition that Logitech hosts every single year. Super awesome. Recommend checking it out. Um, for me, that's a very different audience. I work a lot where coincidentally a lot of the products I've worked with have all been pretty big flagship products. Like things like the limited edition OP, which is like a yellow G Pro wireless. These are things that I know that people who generally love our products or generally know us for PC peripherals will like. I think a big part when I was working on the G Challenge, especially in terms of copy, is I tried really hard to go into like different streams, or I would try and figure out like what kind of people would watch that stream in the first place, and I would try and find something that plugs my perspective into it. So for me, like I would see, okay, who won the G Challenge last year, and I would watch their VODs, or I would rewatch like the G Challenge VODs in general. And then based on what I was feeling from that stream or what they were saying, I would create my copy based on that.
So it sounds like my assumption is right. I mean, someone who, I mean, shamelessly, Logitech product in my hand, right? So the I know a much more limited amount about, and about like things like the racing wheels and the pilot yokes. I'm very aware those products exist, and I know that's one of the things Logitech services that community pretty well. What are some of the differences in those communities that you've noticed, and how do you, as a person who's like probably more naturally involved and in tune with the esports side, how do you get to know that community a little bit better?
If I can personally involve myself into that community, I will. I think it's like the biggest way to figure that out. So I think things like KDA are a really good example where I was already personally involved in that community. I knew what KDA was. I had been an avid League of Legends player, so I had an idea of like what people would like because I knew what I liked. If that makes
Sure.
sense. So for me, like that mentality is definitely what I carry even into communities I don't really understand. For me, it's like if I can involve myself personally, I will. If I can't involve myself personally, I will very actively try and scout people who already know what the community is and get their advice for it. Which is also just like a general thing to do. So always ask for advice. Don't be afraid of doing that. But for us, like we work closely with Maxime MXM on Twitter. She does a lot of sim racing stuff. She's super awesome. And I used to ask her for copy advice all the time to make sure that like what pulse I was picking up from that community did accurately match what they wanted. And it was the best way to not only have my own creative flair in terms of the copy that I was creating, but still have people who were confirming it and actually affirming that what I was saying was correct, like look at it as so it's like a checks and balances system.
So in your current position, right, you have a lot of what I would call like very specific skills, right? Like very specific skills. And I think one thing that can be kind of difficult at any point in your life, right, is going to be when you have to transition those skills, right? Or you have to figure out which of those skills are transferable. So we have another question from Revamp, and then we have a ton of questions that go a little bit more into a little bit more of your collegiate career in esports. But Revamp asked, do you have anyone who wants any advice for anyone who's looking to make a transition, maybe from like esports social media to peripheral social media? And I'm going to make that a little
Hmm.
bit broader. Anyone who might want to switch from like the esports persona on social media over to a brand partner's social media.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think the biggest thing is to know what you are good at. I know it's such a hard thing to say because it's really hard to understand what you're good at, especially for some people. Like for me, it took me a really long time to understand like what it was that I could do, right? And for me, I think I have a better understanding of my value as a person. And I think generally for me, the biggest thing about switching between different social media communities in particular is to understand what community you are reaching out to, sorry. I think a really good example, even within the position I'm working in right now, is that Logitech G and Logitech G esports are two very different communities. Technically, one is a subsection of the other, but who you're reaching out to or who you're trying to reach out to is extremely different. So the content that you produce there is going to be different as well. So having an intimate understanding of like what voice you need in order to reach out to that community and what that community is looking for, I think is the best way to transition between any community. I think another or a good example of this would be the fact that I used to work for EG. I helped a lot with like campaign launches. So I helped with their Pride campaign and their product or their merch launch campaign in particular. And for me, those are extremely different voices from Logitech G because I know that people who are coming into Logitech G's like social channels are interested in seeing what product we have next or an idea of like what is the next product that they should purchase. But that's not necessarily true for evil geniuses because what people are looking for is the team itself, right? So when I'm looking at things like, oh, I'm interested, or if I were someone who were stumbling on Evil Genius's page, I am interested in learning more about their teams. How are their teams doing? And that is the focus that I usually like try and go in on. So it's partially that. I think the easiest ways to get into that kind of mindset is to honestly go through their social media and try and get an understanding of like what it is that these places are emphasizing, what are they de-emphasizing, and what it is that you can do or what you can insert that still matches that voice that they already established prior to you being there.
Awesome. And next, right before we jump fully into a lot more of the questions for your collegiate life, um, I've got to know, and the community definitely needs to know. And I'm gonna kind of hit a few of your accolades in this question, but how do you balance being president of Bruin Gaming, marketing director of UCLA Esports, esports social partnerships intern at Logitech G, and then like just the cherry on top of that, a student? How are you balancing those four things, right? Because one of those, each one of those by themselves is a tough enough balance already to work into life. Take four of those. How are you doing? What do you do to balance that?
Lots of purposeful and mindful organization of my time. I think time management is like the biggest thing that I have learned as a result of all of this. My Google Calendar is like always updated with like everything, reminders about my life, like when I'm blocking out time to work, when I'm blocking out free time. I think another thing that's been really big for me is just like being with good people. Like I will always unwind after like a long day with people that I really love and I care about. And for me, like that's what helps counterbalance all the things I'm doing in life. So definitely actively try and manage your time, but also find good people that make you really happy and stay with them and appreciate them.
Oh, I'm going to challenge you to get a little bit more granular there on time management, right?
Go for
'Cause I
it.
think everyone has their own system, right? Everyone absolutely has their own system. When you're blocking off times, right? So you're talking about you live on Google calendars.
Oh yeah.
Um, so everything like is like people's birthdays, personal event. Are you putting absolutely everything on there? Nothing slips through the cracks if you have it on your calendar, kind of deal.
Oh, absolutely. Every single one of my friends' birthdays are is on my Google Calendar. I won't miss that for sure. But everything, including I think even at my worst point, I have a really bad habit of like not eating when I'm really stressed or busy. And if I didn't have a friend to remind me, I'd go so far as like mark it out on my calendar. I'd tell myself to, even right now, like I have like two reminders on my calendar to like at certain times so that I actually do it. I also just try really hard to like block out or purposely block out time for like free time because I know that if I keep working, I will burn myself out. That's what I actually did in the first few collegiate events that I did. Is I just kept grinding away at them. I didn't think about trying to create free time, and I had no work-life balance. My work never stopped because I didn't want it to, or I didn't feel like it could. But realistically, you need time for yourself. You need to care for yourself, and if it means blocking that time out specifically on a calendar to do that, then do.
So next, I'm gonna ask for another question from Revamp, and Revamp wants to know what have been the highlights through working through all of the intercollegiate things you've done. What have been your highlight moments so far?
Working through intercollegiate, meeting people, meeting all of the amazing people that I know now. I mean, I only know Revamp or Courtney because of these events. And for me, having the opportunity to like get to know all these people and understand their passions and where they come from has been the most gratifying part of doing these events in the first. Same thing with our attendees, especially those that return and will talk to me once in a while. It makes me really happy.
So next, I've got another question, and I'm really curious about your answer to this one because I have a hunch it might actually be reversed. But do you communicate often with past UCLA alumni that have taken a similar path to you, or do you ever reach out to them for advice?
I don't actually. I don't actually connect with that many. It's a really bad habit of mine is that I'm still a little bit afraid of reaching out sometimes, but I know a lot of really uh amazing people. I think for me it was knowing a lot of alumni that had graduated the year that I had come into UCLA that I talked to still. So name dropping again. I'm sorry. But
Okay.
Naveen or Navshik, who currently works at Three Black Dot, and Ashley or Hunter Foxface, who works at Riot Games on their Wild Rift team. They were both people that had graduated the first year I had entered college, and they're probably the biggest inspirations that I've ever had in my life. They're also people that have always been there for me when I needed advice, and I'm definitely not the one that's providing it. I'm always asking or trying to understand like how they got there. And if people want to ask questions, I don't mind answering. But typically, it's not the case for alumni who have already been really successful in their career.
It sounds like, and that's what I kind of assumed. It sounds like through your path, you're actually going to end up being in the position of the alumni, getting questions fired your way to get advice. That's at least how it's sounding on this end. So, um, yeah, congratulations. You're doing so much. It's absolutely awesome to hear. Um, We have another question up from Revamp. So Revamp wants to know if I'm sorry, we touched on that. I'm jumping on down. I'm jumping back. I apologize for that, Lauren. We have another question from Dana. So Dana's back from earlier, and Dana wants to know if you could go back and change one part of your career path so far, what you would change.
I wouldn't change anything. I think,
Oh, I love
uh,
it.
yeah, I think that I've made a lot of mistakes. I've definitely made a lot of mistakes, but also the fact that I made those mistakes in the first place are big because you have to learn from them. I wouldn't have known how to delegate work if I didn't make the mistake of piling work on myself every single event. I wouldn't know that like it's important to keep like the people you're working with close to you as friends and not only as staff members if I didn't do that for 2 events straight. You learn from your mistakes and there's nothing wrong with that. And for me, my path has shaped me to where I am now. And I'm more than grateful for the fact that I have the opportunity to be here in the first place. So no matter what, I would not change what happened for a thing.
Well, what an awesome answer. What a fantastic answer. Well, we'll keep on rolling to the next one. And I think this goes really closely with like the alumni question. I think you kind of shouted this out, but just for anyone else, I think this is a very important facet of anyone's career. But do you have anyone you look up to specifically, like a mentor or role model within esports and gaming? And if so, what are some of the ways they've helped you that you give them credit for shaping that part of you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I have a I have a list. I think the two alumni that I mentioned earlier have been really big. They were really big, especially when I was starting to get into esports and trying to understand the space. So Ashley and Naveen. I think beyond that, the three biggest people that I would mention is Raging Cherry, who currently works at Twitch. He was I would probably call the first mentor I ever had in esports. He taught me a lot. He was always there to answer my questions. And for me, like it was so important and crucial at the point that I was because I was really young in my career. I say that as if I'm old. I was really starting out in my career when I first met him. And he was a really big part in terms of like trying to help me understand what I wanted in life, what it was that I was good at, and also inspired a lot of confidence in me when I didn't have it. So I attribute a lot of my success to him because he means a lot to me in this. I think another person that's been really vital to my success so far would also be the managers that I have. So I have a set of them, specifically Alex. Uh, Alex has been really big for me because he's always been there to answer my questions. I've opened up to him a lot about like even my insecurities about being here. And I feel like it'd be really difficult to say that, especially because in my previous work backgrounds, I didn't necessarily have managers that were that understanding or that really cared for me in that sense. And for me, the feeling I get from him is always that he wants to support me no matter what. He's trying to help me find what I want to do. And it means a lot to me to have someone like that who wants me to grow as a person, not even if it means like moving into different roles. So, me having like this extra partnership end this summer. I think is an example of that where like I was encouraged to continue growing. And even though I'm not 100% on the social media team and I'm still working on it, I'm now splitting my time with someone else and he's 100% okay with that. So for me, like that's really big for me.
So for anyone who heard that out there, make sure you find that person, right? Find that person who's going to challenge you to grow, one, and is going to support your growth in whatever path it may be. Those are the mentors to hold on to 100%, and they are very difficult to find, but don't settle until you find that person.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
it sounds like that person's been super valuable for you in your current trajectory, Lauren.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
so we're gonna get close to rounding out here. We've got a few more, so I hope you don't mind sticking around to kind of knock them out.
Yeah.
We've got another one from the community where John the Ho asks, "How did you come up with the idea to start these intercollegiate casual events? What inspired that, and what's pushed you that direction?"
Oh yeah, good question. For me, it was the idea of building community. I realized that online we had a unique opportunity, even though it sucked to not have like in-person events where I can see everyone and interact with everyone. The biggest benefit of having online events is the fact that it's accessible to everyone. So even right now for the event that we're putting on called Summer Splash, like we're interacting and working with a team in Canada. And that normally wouldn't be possible because flights are expensive, trying to coordinate things like living expenses are a lot, and it's just difficult. So for me, being able to connect with like UC Santa Barbara's community, which is the first community we've reached out to, was so big because I wanted to see if we could bring more people together who love gaming and wanted the opportunity to like just play with other people and meet them. So that's definitely like the biggest inspiration and reason why they started in the first place. And they've continued to grow because for me, it's really fun to see a lot of different people interact, and also the opportunity for me personally to meet all these people from different backgrounds who are just as passionate about esports as I am has been really big.
Fantastic. Your passion for community is really, really awesome. Is there anything that kind of set that off, or have you just always kind of loved fostering communities and working with communities like that? Has it always been a passion for yours, or was there something in your life that really pushed you to? You've mentioned it so many times, and it's incredible. No doubt leads to the success you found and the jobs you've got. What inspired that?
I think a really big part of it is just my experience in speech and debate. For me, I think even in esports, one of the biggest things that I want to do is create opportunities for people, which is why I think having amazing staff members and getting to know them is such a big thing. Because for me, my ultimate goal is not only to create an event where I can have a lot of people mixed together and find their communities, but for my staff members in particular, what I want to create is the opportunity for them to get jobs in esports, right? So having something like a large event on your resume inevitably would help you. And I think that like being able to support those opportunities is really big, especially for people who traditionally haven't had the opportunity to be in this space. So even when I was in speech and debate, a really big part of what I was doing was I was trying to coach a lot of students who didn't have the opportunity to actually get professional coaching or pay for it on their own. And in that sense, I think it brings the community together because you introduce more people who traditionally wouldn't have the opportunity to compete in the first place. And for me, I want to give more opportunities to people in esports who traditionally have been excluded from the space, such as women or people of color, in order to ensure that like esports becomes a better place overall.
Gotcha. And Lauren, with that, I think you're kind of touching on this. And Dana, I've got to thank you. This is such a perfect closing question. Uh, as the world of esports, Dana asks, so as the world of esports continues to boom, what do you hope to accomplish, and what do you want to see of the community? So what are you hoping to be your legacy here in esports?
I want to be remembered as someone I think who has like introduced more people into this space or at least like diversified the community. I think that for me, one of the most critical things I have for esports is I think that traditionally as a community, it has excluded too many people or there aren't enough people who have that opportunity. Like every few months, you'll always see that like a woman is getting pushed out of the space, or even within the people that I know, they typically don't have the opportunity to even like try and work in esports because there are a lot of people who are restrictive against like women joining esports in the first place. I think ideally I want to be remembered as someone who is able to provide that opportunity when traditionally they weren't able to. And I hope to bring more people into the fold of that community in the first place, especially when it comes to like things that we're doing on like the Logitech G side. I hope that more people who aren't like your very stereotypical professional gamer feel more comfortable being part of esports because they see that large pages like Logitech G are encouraging people to be part of esports or part of gaming, even if they're just a casual gamer, right? Because even people who don't compete professionally or have that drive to compete professionally get shamed in this community. So I think that's definitely a really big thing that I want to do.
Well, can't wait to watch you pave that way. It's gonna be super awesome. So I can't wait for you to make the do everything you can to make that difference in the space that we all know and love. But with that, Lauren, we have made it to the end of the hour. So first and foremost, everyone, thanks so much for attending. Thanks for submitting the questions to Lauren. Lauren, thank you so much for spending the hour with the community and me. It was such an awesome time to get to know you and learn a lot about what you're doing in the space of esports. No doubt, nothing but success is coming your way. And just for everyone else to know, these Q&A series are very regular, and there's always opportunities to get a chance to talk with people like Lauren who are super involved in the space. We actually have another Q&A coming next week, August 18th at 5 p.m. Pacific time, with special guest Alec Guthrie, Partnerships and Solutions Executive at TSM. Please make sure you are following the channel so you know exactly when we're live. So make sure you're following TSMU on Twitch. And whatever you do, do not forget to follow TSMU on all of our socials and be involved in the community. Get to know people, play some games, and really take full advantage of this resource TSM has made available to everyone. And Lauren, one more time, just a big thanks to you. And I think you have something you wanted to shout out before we close out here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. Thank you for being an amazing host. This was a great hour. But I wanted to quickly shout out to everyone who is in the chat. If you are interested in joining one of these events that I've been talking about the entire time with the intercollegiate events, we're actually hosting one this weekend. Today is the last sign up date for a couple of our tournaments, but please come out and support us. This is also supported by TSMU, so thank you so much to TSMU for your support. But we're hosting a lot of competitive events, casual games, as well as different giveaways that we'll be doing. So anyone can join this event regardless of where you're from. We have a lot of international folks that are here as well. Come join our community. Everyone is welcome, and feel free to compete whenever. Ali just dropped the link in chat, but yeah, we would love to see you there. And once again, thank you for the opportunity for being on.
Absolutely. I was just about to ask, is there anywhere you want anyone to go visit? So there's a link in the TSMU Discord, it sounds like, from Allie, and then go check out the event you're describing. That's correct?
Yeah, it's also in the chat.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Lauren, thanks again, and I hope you have a fantastic night.
You too. Thank you again.